Nightmares end when we wake up. But what if some don't? We like to tell ourselves that dreams are just random flashes of imagination. Strange little movies our brain puts on while we sleep. And when things get dark, when we dream of shadows, faceless strangers, or something reaching out from the corner of our room, we comfort ourselves with one thought: relax, it was only a nightmare. But what if I told you that sometimes nightmares don't stay trapped in your sleep? Sometimes they follow you. Sometimes they leave scars that don't heal. And sometimes they come true. Tonight, I'm going to share 3 real horror stories straight out of a nightmare. And trust me, you won't forget these. The first is about a man who wakes up paralyzed, frozen in his own bed, only to realize he isn't alone in the room. Someone is standing at the foot of his bed, watching. The second follows a woman who thought her nightmares were just dreams, until pieces of them started happening in her real life. What she saw in her sleep began appearing in her home. And what she discovered in the end is worse than anything her mind could have imagined. And the third? A group of friends who went camping for fun, only to find themselves stalked by the exact same figure one of them had dreamed about the night before. Was it a warning? Or was the dream itself the first step in a nightmare that bled into reality? Stick with me, because each of these stories will pull you a little further into the darkness. And hey, before we dive in, if you love creepy, real-life horror stories and you want more content like this every single week, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Seriously, it helps more than you know. Plus, you don't want to miss what's coming next, because I've got even scarier stories lined up. Now, I have to warn you, nightmares are tricky things. They're personal, intimate, and often carry little fragments of our deepest fears. That's why these stories are so unsettling. They're not just random coincidences. They feel like warnings, like open doors we were never meant to step through. So turn down the lights, grab your headphones, and whatever you do, don't look too closely into the shadows of your room while you're listening, because sometimes what's hiding there isn't part of the dream at all. Are you ready? Good. Let's begin with story number 1. David was 28 when it began. He lived alone in a small one-bedroom apartment on the edge of the city, a quiet place with paper-thin walls and a constant hum of traffic outside his window. Nothing special, nothing strange. But sometimes the most ordinary places become the backdrop for the darkest experiences. It started one night in early spring. David had been binge-watching shows until well past midnight, the glow of his laptop the only light in the room. When he finally fell asleep, he expected nothing more than restless dreams. Instead, he woke in the dead of night to a terror he couldn't explain. He opened his eyes and immediately realized something was wrong. His chest felt heavy, his arms and legs like lead. He tried to move, but nothing worked. Panic rushed in. He wasn't dreaming, at least he didn't think he was. He could see his bedroom clearly. The crooked blinds, the shadow of his dresser, even the blinking light from his Wi-Fi router. Everything was real, too real. And then he noticed it. At the foot of his bed stood a figure. It was tall, darker than the shadows around it, its edges fuzzy like smoke. No face, no features, just a presence. Silent, watching. David's heart slammed against his ribs, but his body refused to move. He wanted to scream, to kick, to leap out of bed, but all he could do was stare as the thing lingered there. After what felt like forever, the weight lifted. He shot upright, gasping, and just like that, the figure was gone. He told himself it was sleep paralysis. He'd read about it before. When your brain wakes up but your body doesn't, sometimes your mind plays tricks. You hallucinate. You see things. That had to be it. But deep down, David knew what he saw didn't feel like a trick. It felt like something real had been in his room. The nights that followed weren't any better. Every few days, he'd wake again, frozen in his bed, the same figure waiting at the foot of it. Always still, always watching. Sometimes it was farther back in the room. Other times, closer. And each time, David swore it lingered a little longer. If you've ever had sleep paralysis, you know how terrifying it is. Your mind is racing, but your body is locked. You're trapped inside yourself, powerless. But David's experiences felt different. It wasn't just the paralysis, it was the consistency. The figure wasn't changing. It wasn't a random dream. It was always there. Always the same. And if you're still with me, if this story is sending chills down your spine, don't forget to hit subscribe. Because stories like this, they only get darker from here. One night in particular would scar him forever. It was raining hard outside, wind rattling the window. David had gone to bed early after a long day at work. Sometime around 3 a.m., he opened his eyes to that familiar heaviness pressing down on him. He already knew. The paralysis was back. But this time, the figure wasn't at the foot of the bed. It was standing beside him. Right there, inches from his face. David's breath caught in his throat. He could see it more clearly than ever before. Not just a blur, but the outline of a head, shoulders, arms. A human shape. Except it wasn't human. The air around it felt wrong. Like static, like pressure in his ears. And then, God help him, it moved. Slowly, the figure crouched down. Its weight made the mattress dip ever so slightly. David swore he felt the bed shift beneath him. His mind screamed, but his body was stone. The shadow leaned closer, and in a voice that was barely a whisper, it spoke his name. David! His heart stopped. He wasn't imagining this. He couldn't be. He heard it. His name, drawn out in a rasp that sounded both far away and right in his ear. And then, as suddenly as it began, the paralysis broke. He lurched upright, gasping, clutching the blanket like a shield. The room was empty, but the feeling lingered, that he hadn't just seen something, he'd encountered it. That night changed him. David tried everything after that. Sleeping with the lights on, playing white noise, even moving his bed to the other side of the room. Nothing helped. Weeks passed, then months, and the figure always returned. Sometimes it only watched. Sometimes it leaned close. Sometimes he swore he could feel its breath on his skin. Friends didn't believe him. They said he was stressed, overtired, maybe depressed. One even joked, "Man, just stop watching horror movies before bed." Easy for them to say. They weren't waking up to something whispering their name in the dark. Eventually, David couldn't take it anymore. He broke his lease and moved into a new apartment across town. For a while, it worked. The paralysis stopped. The nights were quiet. He almost convinced himself it was all in his head, tied to that one apartment. But here's the thing about nightmares. Some don't stay behind. Years later, long after he'd moved, it happened again. He woke in a brand new bedroom, in a brand new home, frozen to the mattress. At first, he thought it was a fluke, a one-off. But then he heard it, faint, almost too soft to catch. That same voice. David! He never saw the figure that time. But he didn't need to. He knew it was there, just out of sight, waiting. To this day, David says he still wakes sometimes with that crushing weight on his chest, the inability to move. And though he tries to calm himself, to remind himself it's just sleep paralysis, deep down he can't shake the truth. That thing never left him. And maybe it never will. So tonight, when you go to bed, take a second to glance at the foot of it. Make sure nothing's standing there. Because if it is and you can't move, well, let's just hope it doesn't know your name. Rachel was 34 when the dreams began. She worked long, exhausting shifts as a nurse, often returning home well after midnight. Her little townhouse was supposed to be her sanctuary, a place to finally breathe after 12 hours of chaos in the hospital. Quiet, safe, hers. But safety is often an illusion. The first dream came on a night like any other. Rachel had stumbled into bed, too tired to even change out of her scrubs. She fell into a heavy sleep and woke up, or thought she woke up, in the middle of the night. Her bedroom door was open. That was the first wrong detail. She always closed it before bed. And there, at the end of the hallway, stood a man. Except, not quite a man. He was tall, unnaturally tall, with broad shoulders and long arms. His clothes were strange, dark, shapeless, almost like they were part of him. But what froze her blood was his face. Or rather, the lack of it. Smooth skin where features should be. No eyes, no mouth, no nose. Just a blank canvas, tilted slightly in her direction. Watching. Rachel tried to scream, but no sound came out. She couldn't move. And then she snapped awake, truly awake this time, heart pounding. It was just a nightmare, she told herself. Just a byproduct of stress, exhaustion, and too much caffeine. But the faceless man came back. Night after night, she dreamed of him standing in her hallway. Always the same distance away, always silent, always watching. Sometimes he tilted his head a little farther, as if curious. Other times he took one slow step closer. By the third week, Rachel dreaded going to sleep. Now, if you've ever had recurring dreams, you know how they get under your skin. The repetition makes them feel less like random dreams and more like messages. And if you're finding yourself hooked already, make sure to subscribe, because these stories only get more chilling the deeper we go. At first, Rachel was convinced it was all in her head. But then, the real-world signs began. One morning, she woke to find her front door unlocked. She was sure she had locked it the night before. It was muscle memory after years of living alone. Another night, she heard faint creaks in the hallway outside her bedroom, soft enough to question, loud enough to dread. The worst was the footprints. It had been raining, and when she came home from a late shift, she saw muddy tracks across her hardwood floor. Not hers. She hadn't worn shoes inside, and these prints were large. Too large. They led from her front door to the hallway outside her bedroom. And then they stopped. No exit prints. Just gone. Rachel wanted to believe she was imagining things, that she'd left the door open, that maybe she'd stepped inside without realizing her shoes were muddy. But deep down, she knew better. And the dreams kept feeding the fear. The faceless man was closer now. No longer at the end of the hallway, but halfway down it. His head tilted farther, his body leaning forward like he was about to step into her room. Rachel started leaving lights on, locking every door and window twice, even sleeping with a heavy flashlight by her side. But nothing helped. She woke every night, staring down the same faceless silhouette in her dreams, and every morning found some new sign that she wasn't alone. One night it all came crashing down. She woke. Not in a dream, not in paralysis, but fully awake, to the sound of a floorboard creaking. Her eyes shot open, and there it was, the faceless man. Not in her dream, in her hallway. Rachel froze. The air was heavy, her pulse thundering in her ears. She could see his outline perfectly in the dim light from the street lamp outside. Tall, wrong, featureless. He didn't move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, silent, watching. Rachel fumbled for her phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. The moment she whispered into the receiver, the figure vanished, like smoke dissolving into the dark. The police arrived minutes later. They searched the house, found no intruder, no broken windows, no forced doors. For a while, Rachel thought maybe she had truly lost it. Maybe it was stress finally breaking her down. And then one of the officers went into the attic. He came down pale, holding a crumpled blanket, an empty water bottle, and a bag of stale food. Someone had been living up there. Rachel's stomach dropped. It wasn't just nightmares. It wasn't just paranoia. Someone had been in her home, creeping through her hallway, standing outside her bedroom, watching her sleep. The police never found him. Whoever it was had slipped away that night, leaving behind only the traces of his presence. Rachel moved out within the week, breaking her lease and swearing never to return. She found a new apartment across town, smaller, safer, with locks she triple-checked every night. For a while, she slept peacefully. No creaks, no footprints, no unlocked doors. But the dreams came back. The faceless man returned, standing in the hallway of her new place. Silent, watching, sometimes closer, sometimes farther, but always there. Rachel doesn't believe he was just a man anymore. Maybe someone was in her attic, but the figure she still sees in her dreams? That's something else. Something darker. She says she can feel it now. That presence pressing in on her as she sleeps, bleeding into her new home, her new life. The nightmare followed her. And worse, it doesn't seem interested in leaving. So if you ever wake up from a dream of someone standing in your hallway, take a second look. Because if the door is open, if the floorboards creak, if the shadows seem too still, then maybe, just maybe, your nightmare didn't end when you woke up. It might be standing there, faceless, waiting for you to notice. Everyone has that one friend who thinks camping is the cure for everything: stress, heartbreak, boredom. For David, Erica, Sam, and Jamie, that friend was Sam. They were in their early 20s, college kids with more energy than common sense, and when spring break rolled around, Sam suggested something different. Not parties, not beaches, not video games all week. Camping, deep in the woods. They borrowed a tent, packed a cooler, grabbed sleeping bags, and drove out to a forest preserve 2 hours from campus. The kind of place where the trees crowd in close and the cell service vanishes. A place where silence feels heavy. First, it was fun. They built a fire, roasted hot dogs, and laughed about professors they hated. For the first time in weeks, the stress of exams melted away. But as the fire burned low and the night stretched on, the woods grew darker, quieter, oppressive. And that's when the first nightmare happened. That night, Jamie fell asleep quickly, curled up in the corner of the tent. Sometime after midnight, he stirred, sweating, heart pounding. He'd had the strangest dream, so vivid it didn't feel like a dream at all. In it, he was lying exactly where he was now, in the tent. Except outside, circling slowly, was a figure. Hooded, tall. Its steps soft but deliberate, crunching in the dirt around them. As it walked, it whispered. The words were too faint to make out, but the tone was wrong, raspy, chilling, like it was speaking directly to him. Jamie sat up, shaken, telling himself it was just a nightmare. He didn't want to wake the others, so he laid back down, forcing his eyes shut. But deep down, something in his gut told him it wasn't just a dream. The next morning, he mentioned it casually over breakfast, trying to laugh it off. But his friends noticed how pale he looked, how uneasy his voice was. "A nightmare," Erica said, pouring coffee from a thermos. "That's all. Happens to everyone." But as the day went on, small things started to unsettle them. First, their firewood pile was scattered. They'd stacked it neatly the night before, but now pieces were strewn around the clearing, as if something or someone had walked through it. Then, Sam swore he saw movement in the trees. Just a flicker, a shadow darting between trunks. Too quick to be sure. By evening, the mood had shifted. They tried to brush it off, but as night fell again, tension hung over the group. And when Jamie drifted into sleep, the nightmare returned. This time, the hooded figure was closer. Its shadow loomed larger against the tent walls, circling, whispering. The words were still muffled, but it sounded almost like names. He jolted awake in a cold sweat, ears straining. The fire outside had burned low, casting faint light through the tent fabric. And then he heard it. Footsteps, soft, slow, crunching in the dirt, just like in his dream. Jamie held his breath. The footsteps circled the tent, steady, deliberate. He glanced at his friends, still asleep, unaware. He wanted to scream, but fear pinned him in place. And then, the whisper, low, raspy, right outside. "Jamie!" His stomach dropped. He shook Erica awake, panicked. She listened, confused, then froze as the footsteps continued. They weren't imagining it. Something was out there. Sam unzipped the tent in a burst of bravado, shining his flashlight into the trees. Nothing. Just darkness and endless woods. But the moment he stepped out, the sound stopped. They stayed awake the rest of the night, huddled together, jumping at every snap of a twig. By dawn, exhaustion weighed on them heavier than fear. They debated leaving. Erica wanted to pack up immediately, but Sam convinced them to stay. "One more night," he insisted. "We're just spooking ourselves." Reluctantly, they agreed. That night sealed the story forever. The four of them lay in the tent, too wired to sleep. Hours passed. The woods outside were dead silent. And then, almost on cue, the footsteps returned. Slow, measured, circling. They held their breath, staring at the thin nylon walls of the tent. A shadow passed across it, tall, hooded, just like Jamie had described. The figure stopped, right outside. And then, in that same rasping whisper, it spoke. Not just Jamie's name this time, all of theirs. "Jamie," Erica, Sam, David. The blood drained from their faces. None of them had told the dream in that much detail. There was no way anyone, anything, should have known all their names. The figure began to circle again. Slower now, deliberate, dragging each step. The whispering continued, but the words shifted, becoming frantic, almost angry. The tent fabric trembled as if something brushed against it. That was enough. David shouted, "Go!" And in a frenzy they tore open the tent, grabbed nothing, and sprinted into the woods. Their cooler, their bags, their phones, everything was left behind. They didn't care. They ran until their lungs burned, until the forest gave way to the dirt road where their car was parked. Piling inside, they slammed the doors, sped off, and didn't look back. The next day, they reported it to a park ranger. He searched the site. The tent was shredded, trampled. Their belongings were scattered, some half buried in dirt. But there were no footprints. Not human, not animal, nothing at all. To this day, the four of them agree on two things. They will never camp again. Whatever Jamie dreamed of that first night wasn't imagination. It was a warning, because sometimes nightmares don't just haunt us in sleep. Sometimes they prepare us for what's really waiting in the dark. And if you ever wake from a dream of someone circling your bed, your tent, or your home, whispering your name, don't dismiss it so quickly, because maybe it isn't a dream at all. Maybe it's your mind trying to tell you the truth, that something is already outside. Point 3 stories. 3 nightmares that never truly ended. David, trapped between sleep and waking, forced to stare at the figure at the foot of his bed. A shadow that whispered his name and refused to let him rest. He thought he could escape by moving, but nightmares have no address. They follow you. Rachel, haunted not only in her dreams but in her own home. The faceless man first appeared in her hallway at night, then showed signs of stepping into her reality. Open doors, muddy footprints, whispers in the dark. Even when the police uncovered the truth of her attic, the nightmare stayed with her, bleeding into her new home, her new life. And then, for friends, who should have been safe in the woods, laughing around a campfire. Instead, their friend's nightmare became their warning. The hooded figure whispered their names, circled their tent, and forced them to flee into the night. Proof that sometimes dreams aren't illusions, but messages. David, Rachel, the campers. What ties their stories together isn't just fear. It's the thin, fragile line between dream and reality. We like to believe that when we wake up, the nightmare ends. But what if waking doesn't close the door? What if it only opens it wider? Nightmares are supposed to be harmless, a trick of the mind, shadows of stress, flickers of fear. But sometimes they aren't just dreams. Sometimes they're doors. Doors to something darker, something watching, something waiting. And the question is, once that door is opened, can it ever truly be closed again? So tonight, when you close your eyes and drift into sleep, be careful. Pay attention to what you dream about. If you find yourself frozen in bed, staring at shadows at the foot of it, if you dream of faceless strangers standing in your hallway, if you hear whispers circling your room, calling your name, don't be so sure it's just a nightmare. Because if your nightmare doesn't end when you wake up, maybe it never was a nightmare at all. And before you go, if these stories unsettled you, if they made you second-guess the silence of your own room, make sure to subscribe. We dive into real horror stories every week, the kind that linger in the back of your mind long after the video ends. Trust me, you don't want to miss what's coming next. Sleep tight,